Hello, I'm Sean Lim, and welcome to After 10. Kimchi may be on the verge of becoming part of UNESCO's Intangible Heritage List. What will this mean for Korea's staple dish and for Korean culture? On today's After 10, we meet the woman behind the campaign to preserve kimchi's heritage in the world. Stay with us. UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage List has 15 Korean cultural assets, including pansori music and the martial art of taekyon. And last October, Kimchi and Kimjang culture was recommended to be the 16th item on that list. As kimchi has become more of an international food, it has also become a part of international culture. The process of making kimchi is being recommended for registration on UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage List. Because of this, interest in Korean culture is rising. To help kimchi and kimjang culture make it on the UNESCO list, the Cultural Heritage Administration put in a lot of effort. As a member of the Cultural Heritage Committee, Bak Sang-mee has worked tirelessly to get kimchi recognized for the list. Meet a woman who has a great passion for sharing the culture of Korea with the world. Well, thank you so much, Professor, for joining us here on After 10.
Thank you for having me here.
Well, kimchi is about to be included perhaps on the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage List. How did this process come about? What does it mean to be on this list?
Well, it's not on the list yet. It was recommended by the subsidiary body of UNESCO to be listed, and the final decision will be made in early December in Azerbaijan when 24 member countries of the Intergovernmental Committee will meet.
So being nominated in the past based on past track records is almost a guarantee. People are very hopeful that this will happen, right?
I think all of us are very hopeful, and I think we are almost sure that it will be listed. The subsidiary body, which makes the evaluation, are a group of experts in the field. And the Intergovernmental Committee, which will vote on listing, are the government bodies. So they basically respect the recommendation by the experts. So we hope that kind of process will go smoothly for enlisting.
And you're involved in this whole campaign because you yourself are a cultural anthropology expert. What brought you to this initiative?
The work related with cultural heritage is basically, the Korean government body is Cultural Heritage Administration, but it's a very specialized field of administration. So government officers have very important job to do, but they also invite experts in the field to work with them because they need some professional knowledge to work with UNESCO and other international organizations.
So it's not just a passion for kimchi that drove you to this project. You've been involved in many other listings of the UNESCO Intangible Heritage List that includes Korean items.
Yeah, there's no doubt that I have a passion for kimchi, I guess, and it grew further, I grew further passionate along the years. However, the field where I'm working is called Intangible Cultural Heritage, and in the context of globalization. So I have been working in other fields like festivals, and I was on the consultative committee for Arirang, which was enlisted last year. So these are all part of intangible cultural heritage.
So if kimchi were to make it to the list, it would be the 16th item on this list?
16th item for Korea on this list. However, there have been a lot of changes in processing the list at UNESCO. At first, it wasn't that competitive. However, over the years, more and more countries got interested, and there have been a very heated debate on the fairness and representativeness and so forth. So nowadays it is highly competitive, and the state parties, by the way, 155 states have ratified the Convention on Intangible Cultural Heritage. And basically, it has become very heated and competitive.
So there's a lot of passion surrounding these items. What does the organization look for in these items these days?
First of all, intangible cultural heritage is called living heritage. That means it should be practiced regularly by the community members. It's not, if you just have historical records but not practiced anymore, a thing of the past, then it cannot be on the Intangible Cultural Heritage List. So the first thing they look for in nominating this heritage is whether the community members, in case of Kimchi and Kimjang culture, that would be all Koreans, think it as a very important part of their cultural identity. And for that, we did a lot of surveys, and of course, kimchi was listed along with national flag and taekwondo as one of the important symbols. So that's the first thing. And in more general sense, they see if that particular heritage represents the creativity of humanity, and it also contributes to cultural diversity of the humanity. So that kind of value. And lastly, they look the nomination files, which I was part of, writing up the nomination files, which is as long as about 30 pages.
Wow.
Basically, it writes almost every aspect of the heritage. And we also submit the documentary film on Kimchi and Kimjang culture. So,
wow.
So they see if those files are appropriately made.
So from the application, if there's any interesting part or passage of the application where you describe kimchi's contribution to humanity, what would that be?
First of all, as for the importance of kimchi or significance of kimchi for Koreans, I wrote, there was one sentence where I wrote, the most humble meal consists of a bowl of rice and kimchi.
Right.
However, the most luxurious banquet is incomplete without kimchi. And I think that's true.
Wow, that's so poetic.
Well, anthropologists are half poets, I think.
Wow. Yeah, wow. So out of the various Korean foods, is kimchi the first to be submitted for this list?
Actually, there was one submission, which was royal cuisine. However, unfortunately, that didn't get listed. It's called referral, which means we have to work on that further and submit again. But in a way, it's a UNESCO's nice way of saying that it's rejected. So we take it that way.
Well, what about other nations here in East Asia, China, Japan? Do they also have foods listed?
As for China, they don't. This year, along with Kimchi and Kimjang culture by Republic of Korea, Japan submitted washoku, which literally means Japanese food. In Korean pronunciation, hwashik. And they had also positive recommendation. So it's interesting that both Japan and Korea will have their food. If everything goes smoothly, we both will have our food for the first time.
Why do you think kimchi was chosen so enthusiastically by the public? Do you think because it is so essential and so emblematic of Korean culture?
Well, I guess that's the primary reason. But I also sensed that sort of a kind of anxiety among Koreans that we are not making our efforts to safeguard this kimchi and kimjang culture enough. And kimchi might lose the identity of Koreanness if we just put it there. So it's about time for us to emphasize, the unique Korean characteristics of kimchi making.
What do you think UNESCO saw that interested them about kimchi and the making of it?
I think they know that kimchi is not just one of the many side dishes for Koreans. And kimchi, in the nomination file, along with the culinary value of kimchi, we also mentioned how kimchi making, especially before winter, the large quantity of kimchi making called Kimjang, what it means to Koreans.
What does it mean to Koreans?
It's basically, on the one hand, it's a it's a really nice way of using human wisdom in adapting to nature in a given ecological condition. So rather than using up the environment, they sort of followed the seasonal changes, and kimchi actually has so many ingredients, and some of them should be prepared in spring, summer, and autumn. And it lasts flavor. The long winter. So right. It's just part of the natural life cycle of Koreans. But on the other hand, another important thing is because kimchi is so essential for Korean meal system, traditionally Koreans made sure that their neighbors have some kimchi over the winter. So there was some kind of custom where they let poor neighbors take some kimchi out of the earthen jars, which is usually buried outside the house, and they pretended not knowing because they might lose face if the neighbor, So it was a sort of a nice way of sharing, and I think that kind of tradition is in modern society. We see the spectacle of thousands of people making kimchi on Seoul Plaza, and then that kimchi is given to people who cannot do their own kimjang. So I think that the spirit of sharing is very well represented in kimchi making, especially before winter, which was the harshest time for many people.
Well, speaking of the variety of kimchi, what we see behind us is probably the most well-known version of it, the Napa cabbage with the spicy red pepper paste. Did you register just one type of kimchi or many types?
Well, we use the term kimchi as a categorical name, and under some description of what kimchi is, we said that, there are over 200 kinds of kimchi, although general public or an ordinary person would know probably 5 to 10 different kinds of kimchi. Actually, on the survey that I mentioned on kimchi and people's interest in kimchi, we asked each respondent to write down all the names of kimchi that they know, and the average was over 5.
Well, back in 1996, speaking of the relation between Korea and Japan over kimchi, there was quite a stir over Korea's kimchi and Japan's kimuchi. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this? It's amazing that even the neighborhood little shops in Japan, we see kimchi sold as kimuchi, and many Japanese people enjoy having kimuchi or kimchi alongside with Japanese food, like their tsukemono, which is the salted vegetable that as part of their food tradition. However, the controversy over the origin of kimchi was, very strong several years ago when Japanese government tried to register kimchi as a sort of a standard form of kimchi making. And of course, Koreans were not very happy. And I think claiming the origin of kimchi was not the original purpose of UNESCO in listing, but by listing kimchi on UNESCO's list, I think it will have some side effect or some benefit of associating kimchi and Korea even more strongly. Right, so we can clear that part of history and leave that behind once this listing gets finalized.
Most members of global community already know that kimchi is from Korea, and Korean people like to eat that spicy kimchi.
The people of Korea are putting in various efforts to help globalize kimchi. The 20th Gwangju World Kimchi Culture Festival slogan this year was Kimchi, Fly to the World. This shows the push towards the globalization of Korean culture, including kimchi.
Many people around the globe know about kimchi, but for those who may not know about the dish, what efforts do you think should be made here in Korea and by Korean people to help globalize our culinary tradition?
Well, it's my personal opinion, but I think the best way to globalize Korean culture, whether it's culinary culture or otherwise, I think the best way is for us to appreciate and enjoy it. And then outsiders will be more interested, and they see that Koreans enjoy it, they might be interested. Personally, I'm a bit against, making any conscious effort, very aggressive efforts. In that case, I think there might be some, negative impact as well. So.
Right, because sometimes when people ask, "Oh, why do you like kimchi?" I say, "Well, the probiotics, the good bacteria, it's so good for your health." And then they're like, "Oh, well, if you like it, then I might like it." So yeah, I think that would make sense. Other than kimchi, are there other parts of Korean culture that you would like to promote maybe for the next Intangible Heritage List campaign?
Actually, the next item I'm working on is tug of war. Tug of war has been practiced hundreds of years in Korea, but this time we are trying to we are preparing the nomination file along with 3 other countries. It's called the multinational nomination file with the Philippines, Vietnam, and Cambodia. And I really love this project. I personally love it because I think it's really it's the job that UNESCO or Korea should do, because putting yet another Korean cultural heritage on the list, I guess, is not as important as sharing our work and celebrating the common threads among these different cultures. So we find tug of war in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Philippines, and we're trying to find some common features, and we are working together. Just last week, the 4 countries met in Seoul. The government officials and academics met in Seoul, and we discussed how to write the nomination file.
Wow, so that's still being worked on
That
right
will be
now.
submitted March next year. And actually the evaluation process from the submission until the final decision, it takes about 2 years.
Wow.
So the decision for tug of war, if it's successfully submitted next March, will be made in year 2015, December.
And there'll be maybe a big tug of war celebration between all the countries.
I think so. Do you know that tug of war was one of the Olympic sports in early 20th century?
I had no idea.
It was, yeah.
What is the common thread between the 3 countries in terms of the sport and humanity?
They do this rope pulling, or and sometimes they pull sticks, long sticks. Usually it's not for a sports competition, but people want to celebrate the harmony of the community. And also, in most cases, who wins and who loses is predetermined. It's almost like a ritualized ceremony, because they have the sort of a belief that if this particular side wins, this year's harvest will be plentiful. So everyone wants this particular side win. So they have a really sophisticated scenario, and it's ritualized.
Were there any other Korean items on the UNESCO Heritage List process that have been delayed?
There were, but rather than submitting the delayed or referred nomination files again and again, the Cultural Heritage Administration, and along with the experts and other government bodies, try to come up with some kind of consensus. What will be the best strategy? And in this year, we are working on multinational nomination file because it's sort of a good contribution to the region. And at the same time, we can submit this nomination file in addition to the 1 year, 1 nomination file per country kind of rule. So we can do 2 by doing this way.
So preparing for this nomination file has a significance beyond just this UNESCO Intangible Heritage List. What would that be?
Well, like I said before, it's I think at this stage for Korea it's not important to put yet another cultural heritage on the UNESCO's list. Already we are one of the few countries which has the largest number of heritages on the list. I think if we share the experience of preparing for nomination files and putting the heritage on the list with our neighbors who do not have such experience yet, I think it's a really nice way of finding some common ground to cooperate with our neighbors, and that can be broadly termed as cultural ODA, Official Development Assistance. Korea is now increasing its ODA budget every year, year by year. Cultural ODA is, I think, is really very valuable in the sense that cultural ODA is not only to give something to them. Actually, this heritage is for all people, not just for that country particularly, but our future generations will have diversity if we sustain that. So I think it's a really good cause.
So aside from all of the work that you do here on this committee, I understand you're also a professor of cultural anthropology. What kind of research do you do, or what kind of teaching do you do for your students?
Well, my student body is about half are Koreans, but about half are from outside Korea, and they major in international studies and not necessarily anthropology. So what I teach is the relationship between culture and globalization and understanding culture. So all these cultural aspects of international studies. And as for my research, I'm interested in what happens to cultural diversity when globalization proceeds. So some people think that all the cultures will become very similar if we are globalized enough. But we also see the evidence of global culture adapting to local cultures. So that's my big question I try to solve in my research.
And what other plans do you have for the future? It already seems quite full.
Well, I think I still like my academic research, and I will keep asking questions on culture and globalization. But I also would like to do some public work, such as cultural heritage related work, because I think that's one of the ways of utilizing my specialty for good cause.
Right. Well, certainly kimchi lovers and kimchi fans will be very grateful for your efforts for the UNESCO list.
Not only my effort, I was part of it, but.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here on After 10 and sharing your insights.
Thank you very much.
And that does it for us tonight on After 10. Join us again next time. We'll see you soon.